Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the psychological thriller films from 2019, titled The Intruder. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie opens with a speeding car, where two friends, Scott and Mike, are seated inside. A worried Scott scolds Mike for overspeeding, but the latter inadvertently says there's a surprise party waiting for Scott. Realizing he ruined the surprise, Mike requests Scott to at least act surprised when they walk in. Soon, they enter Scott's apartment, where he pretends to be surprised to see his wife, Annie, and their friends gathered to celebrate. Scott wonders how Annie organized the party so quickly, since he only closed the deal an hour ago. Mike then raises a toast to Scott, and honors him as their company's top earner. After the party, Scott asks Annie about the dream she had of buying a house in Napa Valley. He asks if she still wants that, to which she responds positively. The next day, the couple goes to see a house they're interested in, which is located in a remote area in the woods. But when they arrive, they don't see anyone around, and Annie mentions that she heard someone in the back. They begin exploring the property. But then,
this is incredible.
The couple is shocked to see this, but the man claims there's a bounty on these deer. He then introduces himself as the owner of the house, Charlie. Next, Charlie takes them to the house, and reveals that he and his wife raised two kids here. Unfortunately, his wife died from cancer 2 years ago. He shares that his great-great-grandfather built the house in 1905, and it's the only place he's ever lived. Charlie also mentions that after selling the house, he plans to move to Florida to be with his daughter, Cassidy. Annie seems impressed by the place, and Charlie also shows a keen interest in her. After the house tour, Scott inquires about the price, which Charlie reveals to be $3.5 million. But Scott believes it is too expensive, and decides to leave with his wife. Moments later, Charlie approaches them again, offering to throw in some furniture, and even reduce the price to $3.3 million. He claims to be very particular about his buyers, and wants the couple to have the house. However, Scott responds that they have more places to visit and will inform him of their decision later. On the way home, Annie keeps coaxing Scott to buy the house since she loves it. Scott isn't too thrilled, as the house is old, and needs a lot of work. But Annie persists, claiming that she's willing to put in the effort, and wants to raise their children there. In the end, Scott agrees to make his wife happy. In the next scene, we see the couple has finally purchased the home and is moving in. Charlie is also there, looking slightly emotional, since he has spent his entire life in the house. He hands over the keys to the couple, and drives away from the property, while Annie feels sorry for the old man. In the evening, the couple invites Mike and his wife over for a housewarming dinner. After the meal, Mike steps outside to smoke in the garden, and begins to relieve himself there, when he suddenly hears footsteps behind him. This spooks him slightly, so he throws his cigarette on the ground and heads back inside. The next morning, as Mike and his wife prepare to leave, Mike notices a cigarette burn on his car seat. Scott accuses him of doing it, but Mike is upset and claims he never smokes in his car. Days later, while at work, Scott receives a phone call from Annie with surprising news. It turns out Charlie has suddenly reappeared, and is mowing their lawn. The couple is confused, but Annie says she'll talk to him. She then asks Charlie what he's doing here since he was supposed to be in Florida. Charlie explains that his trip has been delayed, and he's currently staying at a local hotel. And the reason he came to the house is to give her a list of local phone numbers, such as plumbers and electricians. When Scott returns home later, Annie informs him about how Charlie helped with their garden. She also reveals that she invited him to their Thanksgiving dinner out of gratitude. This annoys Scott, but Annie argues that she felt bad for Charlie, since he doesn't have any family nearby. The scene then cuts to Thanksgiving, where the couple is busy preparing the table for dinner. Soon enough, Charlie shows up with a pie, and compliments how lively the home looks now. However, his mood suddenly shifts when he notices that his family tapestry in the living room has been replaced with a painting. He does his best to suppress his anger, and doesn't say anything bad. After some time, Mike and his wife also arrive. Mike isn't too impressed with the house's interior, and casually suggests making some changes. But this angers Charlie, and he firmly remarks that making such changes would ruin the house's integrity. He is so furious with Mike that he grabs the wine bottle and strikes him in the head. But it turns out to be only his angry imagination. Later, Mike steps outside to smoke, and Charlie also follows him. Here Mike asks if Charlie has truly let go of the place, since he heard Charlie came over to mow the lawn. The old man openly reveals that he still keeps an eye on the house, and drives by from time to time. He also mentions that he hunts in the woods here. However, Mike seems to trigger Charlie's angry side again when he's about to toss the cigarette to the ground, but he changes his mind, and looks for a trash can. After the old man leaves, Mike tells the couple that he believes Charlie was the one who put the cigarette in his car. He thinks Charlie still considers the house his, and is secretly watching them. The couple doesn't believe him, so Mike bets that if they go outside right now, they might catch him lurking in the woods. And so, Scott and Mike head into the woods, which lead to a nearby road. They find fresh car tracks, which seem suspicious since the old man left a while ago. Suddenly, they notice a car in the distance. But before they can identify who the driver is, the car speeds away from there. The following day, Scott becomes worried and hires a few workers to set up cameras outside the house. Moments later, Charlie unexpectedly shows up, and scolds the workers for drilling holes in his house. He says he was just fishing nearby and saw the van go by, so Scott explains that he is doing this for their safety since there's a prowler in the woods. But Charlie asserts that they are just high school kids who party in the woods. He insists that the CCTV camera is unnecessary, but Scott refuses to listen to him. Later that night, Scott can't sleep, as he keeps hearing creaking sounds in the house. Soon, the motion detecting lights outside the house suddenly turn on by themselves. Scott goes outside to confront the intruder, but it turns out to be a group of high school kids, who run away in their car. Surprisingly, we also notice Charlie lurking in the dark. Days later, at work, Scott concludes a meeting with a client, who invites him to join their team for drinks afterward. Meanwhile, Annie is decorating for Christmas, when Charlie unexpectedly shows up at the house with a bottle of wine. The old man is excited by the Christmas decorations. Annie then asks if he wants to help with the work, which he eagerly accepts. After finishing up the work, the two head inside the house, and decide to drink wine together. During this time, the creepy man subtly checks out Annie's body, showing an obvious interest in her. Just then, Annie gets a text from Scott, saying he'll be late. This upsets her, and she immediately calls him, questioning why he texted instead of calling. Scott claims to be in a meeting, but Annie hears noises in the background, and realizes he's actually in a bar. Meanwhile, Charlie eavesdrops on the conversation with keen interest. After hanging up, Scott tells his client that he needs to go back home soon. But she unexpectedly gets closer and tries to kiss him, so Scott immediately tells her that he can't do this, and the woman decides to leave him alone. When Scott returns home, he gets upset to learn that Charlie was here earlier. However, Annie also scolds him for texting instead of calling, revealing that the last time he did that, he was cheating on her. Scott claims he has apologized multiple times for that, and asks for her trust. But Annie is still angry and decides to sleep in a separate bedroom for the night. Later, while Scott is sleeping, he suddenly wakes up to strange noises, and catches a glimpse of Charlie in the darkness. He immediately gets up to investigate, and sees that Annie also jolts awake. Scott tells her he might have seen Charlie, but she dismisses the idea, reminding him that they installed a security system. Here, the couple apologizes to each other for their earlier fight. They then start making love, unaware that Charlie is watching them creepily. The next day, Scott goes to a cafe in town, where he comes across a man, who turns out to be his neighbor. They begin chatting, and the neighbor suddenly reveals that Charlie's wife died in the house. In a shocking twist, he adds that she actually shot herself, according to what Charlie told the police. Scott is left bewildered by this revelation, and wonders why Charlie would lie to them. Later that night, Scott tells Annie about this, and suggests that Charlie might have had something to do with his wife's death. However, she once again dismisses the idea, and doesn't believe he could be a murderer. Afterward, on their way back from dinner, the couple passes by the hotel where Charlie claimed to be staying. They head inside, and find him sitting at the hotel bar, drinking. Scott, who is clearly drunk, begins rudely questioning Charlie about why he hasn't moved to Florida yet. He then bluntly tells the old man that he is no longer welcome in their house. Upon hearing this, Charlie looks furious, but doesn't say anything, while the nice Annie takes her husband away from there. The next morning, Scott wakes up early and goes for a morning jog. But then all of a sudden, this causes Scott to collapse unconscious. In the next scene, the doctor informs Annie that Scott is fine and hasn't suffered any major injuries. However, the test results are not complete yet, so he needs to stay overnight for observation. Upon hearing this, Scott urges Annie to go home, assuring her that he'll be fine alone. After she leaves, Scott calls Mike, and tells him that he thinks Charlie was the one who hit him. He believes the old man is obsessed with the house, and is now fixated on Annie. Scott thus asks Mike to approach their office IT guy, Brian, and dig up everything he can about Charlie. Meanwhile, at home, Annie is soaking in the bathtub, when she hears someone slamming the door. She heads downstairs and finds Charlie outside the door, carrying a pizza. He says he heard about Scott's accident, and brought food in case she was hungry. Charlie mentions that it reminded him of the time when his wife was in the hospital battling cancer. He then turns to leave, but Annie feels bad for him and invites him to eat together. Returning to Scott, he is visited by Mike, who has uncovered the truth about Charlie. It turns out that Charlie's construction company has gone bankrupt, he's facing multiple lawsuits, and is drowning in debt. As a result, he was forced to sell the house he loved. Shocked, Scott asks Mike to check on Annie at home to make sure she's okay. Later, when Mike arrives at the house, he is shocked to see Charlie and Annie having dinner together. He decides to spy on them to find out what's going on. But unfortunately, Charlie notices him through the window. Charlie then informs Annie that there are some kids spying on them, and he will go deal with them. Surprisingly, he grabs an axe and chases Mike, who runs as fast as he can. But the old man eventually catches up, and pretends to be relieved to see that it's just Mike. Charlie then offers to walk Mike to his car. On the way, Charlie asks Mike what he would do if he had the chance to reclaim what he has lost. Charlie suddenly adds that he was given this chance, and all he had to do was get rid of Scott. But before Mike can react to this,
What the?
sometime later, Charlie returns to the house, claiming he twisted his ankle while going after the kids. As Annie is checking his leg, he suggests that maybe he should stay for the night since the kids might come back. However, an uncomfortable Annie suggests that it's probably best if he leaves, to which the creepy man reluctantly agrees. The next day, Scott returns home after being discharged, only to find Charlie standing in front of the house with flowers. This infuriates Scott, so he informs the old man that he knows about his bankruptcy and multiple offenses. He orders Charlie to leave and never come near their property again. Hearing this, the old man remains silent, and quietly walks away from there. Afterward, Scott meets up with his wife, and shares his suspicions that Charlie was the one who hit him. He then asks what time Mike left the house, but Annie reveals that he was never here. Scott grows even more annoyed when he finds out that Charlie was at their house the previous night. Having had enough, he immediately calls the cops, and puts a restraining order against Charlie. He then tries calling Mike multiple times, but there is no response. The next day, at work, Scott asks Brian if he was able to find out anything more about Charlie. Brian reveals that he managed to track down the phone number of Charlie's daughter, who surprisingly changed her name from Cassidy to Vanessa 2 years ago. Scott then heads for home, and decides to call Cassidy on the way. But upon hearing her old name, the woman becomes terrified and abruptly hangs up the call. Meanwhile at home, Annie returns from the grocery store. And then this happens.
Hey,
What are you doing?
I just wanted to see you alone.
She is startled by Charlie, who suddenly tells her that she might have heard some bad things about him, but they are all lies. He adds that everything he plans to do moving forward will be for their future together. Scared, Annie politely asks him to leave for now. Afterward, she locks all the doors, but soon hears creaking noises coming from a linen closet. She goes to check it, but ends up slipping and falling into the basement. Even worse, she discovers that Charlie has been living there the entire time. There's a bed, and even a washing machine. Annie then walks down a dark hallway, and eventually finds an exit door leading outside. Unfortunately, Charlie notices her peeping out from the door, so Annie has no choice but to return to the basement. As if that wasn't enough, she comes across a freezer where Mike's body is kept. The horrified woman manages to make her way back upstairs, and reaches her phone. However, Charlie catches up with her. He tries to assault her, and despite Annie fighting back fiercely, Charlie eventually knocks her unconscious. Elsewhere, Scott is driving home when Cassidy calls him, and reveals that her father is a pathological liar from whom she has been hiding. To add, Charlie killed his own wife, because she wanted to divorce him and take the house. Cassidy asserts that the house means everything to Charlie, and he will kill anyone who gets in his way. Upon hearing this, Scott is terrified, and he immediately calls his wife to warn her, but it's too late. Meanwhile, Charlie takes the unconscious Annie to bed and begins acting like a creepy old nerd. But she soon regains consciousness and starts fighting with him again. Just then, Scott returns home, and is shocked to see the house in complete disarray. He calls out for his wife, but Charlie quickly gags Annie, and ties her up before leaving the room. Next, Scott grabs a knife and goes upstairs. Suddenly, Charlie sneaks up behind him, and launches an attack. The two engage in a brutal fight, but the old man turns out to be strong despite his age. He ends up throwing Charlie downstairs, and knocking him out. Meanwhile, Annie manages to break free from her restraints, and when Charlie returns, he finds the door locked. The old man eventually breaks in, only to be confronted by Annie. But the attack barely phases Charlie, who effortlessly overpowers her, while expressing how much he loves her. Scott also regains consciousness during this time, and rushes to his wife's aid. Just when all hope seems to be lost, Scott shows up and fights the old man. Charlie once again gains the upper hand, and brutally beats up Scott. But this time, Annie stabs Charlie in the back and manages to injure him badly. The old man staggers toward the basement, while Annie reveals to Scott that Mike is dead, and that Charlie had been living in their basement all this time. Following this, the couple decides to run away from the house, but Charlie returns with a gun and begins shooting randomly, forcing them to retreat into a room. He shoots out all the lights, plunging the house into complete darkness. The psycho wants the couple to get out of the house, and then starts shooting at each door one by one, trying to find the couple. But just when it seems like he's about to find them, Scott slams a bat into his face, and grabs the old man's gun. Meanwhile, Annie calls 911, and suddenly reports and says that her husband has shot an intruder. Charlie feels betrayed by her, and begins to cry and plead for his life. But the movie comes to an end as Scott finally pulls the trigger. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.